I'm Margaret Krym. I was born in San Francisco, California, and now I live in Cape Coral, Florida. When I was 8, we went to Guam. I grew up in Guam, and my parents and my grandparents have always had been Christian Scientists. So um, that's not something you find everywhere. In Guam, there was this tiny little group of Christian Scientists. So um, as a child, I did have some Sunday school, but not a tremendous amount. And you're sort of on your own out there. There's not a lot of structured uh, um, resources. When I went to college, I pretty much strayed far away. When I graduated from college, I had, I didn't, before I graduated, I married. I had 2 small children. When those children, the youngest one was 6 weeks old, I found myself a single mother in San Francisco and struggling in a lot of ways. And at that time, went back to church looking for strength, answers, understanding, support, and began to really find that. But I was by that time 25, and it began. I remember my prayers really were to understand, because I wanted it to make sense. I wasn't satisfied with dogma. It couldn't just be words. It couldn't be ritual. I wanted to know why about everything. So I prayed for understanding, and I remember I would be reading in the Bible, and things would just, that's what that means. And I really feel like I received that understanding, and it began to change my life and mold things and change my direction. And that's probably pretty much been the center of my life. Although I've had a lot of work opportunities and done different things, the center has really been this continuing growth of seeking understanding. Well, I think that most people begin, when they think about Christian Science, the first thing that comes to thought for most people is they don't go to doctors. So there's the whole thought of, especially where children are involved, if that, that there might be, parents might be withholding care for the children. Well, in my situation growing up as a child, if the need presented, my parents always took me to a doctor. So I wasn't, and actually in traveling, going to Japan, I was, there was a whole array of shots that were required. And I remember having a million shots to go overseas on a military transport. And so rather than fighting the system or fighting all of that, it was my parents chose to just, that to acquiesce and to accept that no harm could come from that either. So my situation, there are Christian Science parents that don't choose to do that, and that is, in the eyes of the public, I think sometimes a difficult thing to understand. But in my case, that was not the case. And even my children growing up, I took them to the medical community if there was a need. But on the other side of that, I have to say that I rarely had need. So, which comes first, the chicken or the eggs? Who knows there? Perhaps that's a reflection of having a sense of faith that we can trust the future to be good, to have a sense of security in knowing that we live in God's world, and wherever we go, it'll be safe. That might be a quality that came from that kind of thinking, which would be an outcome of the religious thinking of Christian Science. But, you know, a lot of people feel that way from other kinds of faith as well. You know, that sense of, and he saw everything he'd made, and behold, it was good. And, you know, if you begin with that premise, then, you know, your fear of going out is taken away.
What are some of the ideas in Christian Science, though, that are really appealing to you, or that are some of the things you lean on? Just beliefs.
Well, you know, a fundamental thing that really makes Christian Science different from most other faiths, I think, is mankind, I think, believes that he lives in matter. We live in this body. This body is the substance of our identity. It's and that somehow we're within it. And just like, you know, Ptolemy's theory of the sun going around the earth, or the earth going around the sun, I think we might, in Christian Science, we would spin that around the other way and say that man is spiritual, and that the matter is a manifestation of the consciousness that we hold about ourselves. So now matter becomes something more fluid, less substantial, more changeable as thought changes, as consciousness becomes more aligned with a holier thought, and that kind of transformation of matter gives man enhanced ability to have dominion over himself, over his world, over his reality. That's I think a point of demarcation that sets Christian Science in a different dimension. Sort of many faiths will accept the fact that man is spiritual, but we would say that should be demonstrable. We should be able to use that information and that understanding to alter our experience, to have dominion, to that if when it says and you shall have dominion, you shall have dominion, and that and in many times I have seen things change, that if we were held into the rigidity of matter being substantial and being the building blocks of creation, if we're held into that kind of rigid thinking, these things would seem impossible. That's really the probably the essence of what we might call healing in Christian Science, is seeing the fluidness of matter, being open to the possibility of what some would call miracles, seeing the coincidence of God and man joined together in life experience, being conscious of that, having that be tangible and present. And
what's your concept of God?
Well, I think of it more in terms of qualities. I think of it. Love is a quality of God that we can experience, that gives us a feeling of the presence of God. Principle, or I think Emmanuel, the places where consciousness joins with that greater consciousness. Um, I certainly don't think of a man with a white beard and that's, I think it's important to perceive man in God's image, not the other way around, not God in man's image, all of that kind of thing. I I think of a presence. I feel a presence. I had an experience once. I was struggling with something, and I was on the boat. We were at anchor in a very remote place, and I remember sitting on the bow of the boat where you have a sense of kind of, we were anchored, but it was sort of feeling like you're flying, you're floating about 10 feet above the water. You can't really see the boat. All in front of you is water. And I think I'd had an argument with my husband. We were fighting about some trivial thing, no doubt. And I was sitting up there, and I was frustrated at the moment because I couldn't feel that sort of presence. And I remember thinking, sort of even saying, "Are you there?" And I just had this sort of flood of feeling of course I am, you silly girl. It's like almost like, a parent would be saying, "Of course, what did you think? What do you expect?" And in that moment, it's like the temperature changed, the clarity of the air changed, the smell changed, the breeze felt different, the sky looked different, everything just felt and looked different. And I just had this sense of being companioned. It was just a kind of a profound moment, and that sense of that there was that kind of closeness that if I ever turned to ask, and that the presence was there, so wherever I could go, there would never be a place that wouldn't be there, that companionship wouldn't be there. It was a very precious moment for me. I like the thought of there's a passage about take off your shoes, where you stand is holy ground. And my thought about that is that when we turn thought to that kind of presence, we are standing on holy ground. And that can be anywhere. But taking off our shoes is this sense of the humility to come to turn and acknowledge. And so we're always on we're always, holy ground is always available to us. It's things like that give me a great sense of safety, security. I've had so many experiences. It's kind of an instinctive thing for me to do that. So, for example, I remember in my 20s having. Well, here's one specific example. I was in Saipan. I traveled there. My kids were with me, and actually on this particular trip, my mother and father were with me. And we were at a restaurant, and I'd had a couple of experiences of uh, uterine infections. Uh, and I had actually a couple of times been to a physician and gotten antibiotics for that. So, it's not something that we never do. We would meet a medical need, or I would, with the ability that I had to meet it at the time. So at any rate, this particular time, the symptoms indicated that I was in a great deal of pain. We were in a restaurant having dinner, and it was such pain that I really couldn't sit there at that table anymore. excused myself, went to the car, and I remember just being very calm and quiet, and calling into thought so many passages, beneath his wings. There are so many psalms, and of safety. Um, you know, um, Beautiful kinds of compassionate passages about being cared for, watched over, covered with this love. And so I some hymns began um, being in my thought. Well, soon my parents came, and being that they too were, especially my mother, Christian Scientist, I knew would be reinforcing, supporting me in that effort, as opposed to creating a sense of fear and hovering and are you all right, and So we went back to the hotel, and I continued to just sort of dwell in the consciousness of love. Um, Always before, up till this time when I'd had those experiences, I had sort of reverted, gone and gotten clinical medical help. But in this case, I just let it go, and went to sleep that night. The next morning, I got up and it was completely gone. And we went out that day, had an outing on a boat, went to an island, went to the beach, had a full day of activity and fun. And of course, I'm filled with gratitude and joy, but it's my expectation that we should have that kind of dominion. And I have many times since experienced similar kinds of things that, and the older I get, the more I exercise that sort of spiritual muscle. The more confident, the more comfortable I am to trust and sort of rest in that kind of safe place. I don't, I have had other kinds of challenges, little things that, here's a little example. I had something just, kind of growing on my arm, and, I had a thought, whew, this could be, because we hear this in the media, this is probably skin cancer. This is going to be bad. And we rehearse, we have this come to us continually, constantly. We are bombarded by the bad outcome, the potential. And, I began to dwell on the ideas of skin. What is skin? Skin is the boundary between me and thee. Skin is the place where conflict would exist, where friction would occur, where I would become vulnerable to wounds. And skin is the organ that records the history of wounds. And but mostly, there's also a saying. I might not be able to quote it exactly, but the universal solvent of love, meaning that love is a universal solvent and dissolves self-righteousness, self-will, justification, and so I began to consider those kinds of ideas. This didn't happen overnight, but I would. I never went to seek opinions or help or whatever. I just began to think about this universal solvent and this love that would exist among mankind, that would smooth over the thing that was the separation, the places of separation. And that thing just wasn't there one day. So how does that happen? I mean, another person would immediately go and seek an opinion and, get it removed and intervene, and fear would, so that isn't like I would say that instead I turned to prayer, but that prayer was just bringing in to conscious understanding ideas that didn't place the importance on rigid matter that had to be fixed. It instead dwelt on ideas that were replaced with new ideas, and the skin was replaced with new skin.
What's your greatest wish?
Well, we've spoken on and off today, and about my sense of expectation for the future, my hopefulness for an awakening and an enlightenment for mankind that would uh, cause man to begin to see the unity that exists. I have this image in my thought that has came to me one day of I should paint it. I should make a picture of it, because it's such a strong, powerful, almost emotional feeling I have about this image. But it's like a blue sky, and there's sort of this crimson scarf silk that's just sort of floating in this breeze, and it's gently moving, and the movement of it is so harmonious in this gentle up and down, and the meaning of that image to me is that man exists in this woven fabric, each individual thread being an individual person identity, but woven so tightly together that when one thread moves up, the others follow in this sort of gentle dance of just, there is no pulling. There's no one thread saying, I'm going to go that way, and the other one, I want to go that way. It's just this sense of unified movement that expresses the oneness of man. And for me, that's been a very healing message, because I've used it in instances of business where it seems that we have many wills, many minds pulling many different directions. And I come back to that image, and it puts me in a place of being able to be still, and somehow that calls out of others the ability to meet in that place of common good. So my greatest wish is really to see that kind of awakening, and I feel that that it's possible. I look for that I see evidence of it coming. Even what you're doing, I'm thrilled by that, because it gives me a great sense of joy, hope.
Tell me about a time you doubted your faith. What happened?
Okay, it's funny. I'm. This is just spontaneous, so I'm sure there were more than just this time, but this is one time that was powerful in a sense. We had friends who were going to be traveling, and when you went on vacation from Guam, you didn't go for a weekend. You went for a month, or you took a good long time. And they had two beautiful dogs, a golden retriever and a Doberman. And we didn't have a dog, and we had kids, and we loved their dogs. We knew them very well, and we said, we'll be happy to keep your dogs while you're away. So during that time, one Sunday afternoon, I actually was out with the children. My husband was doing yard work and he had the dogs in the yard with him. One of them, the Doberman, saw another dog across the street and went running off to play and didn't notice, and a car was coming down the street and hit the dog. And the dog managed to make it back up the little incline up to where my husband at the time was. And, by the time I was driving in the driveway, he was getting the dog into the back of the car to take him to the vet. And of course, we're upset and it's not our dog, but we love the dog. So we got the children settled and I went to the vet and with him, and the vet was not very promising, and treated the dog and basically said, well, if he makes it through the night, then there's a chance that he'll make it. But, this could be he might not make it through the night. You should expect that. Well, I began to pray and to do everything I could think of to do to will an outcome that would be positive, that this dog would live. And, I did all the work that I could think to do. And I did come to a place of peace about it that night. And my expectation was that in the morning he would be fine. And in the morning, when I called, he was gone. He had died in the night. Well, I was devastated. I was disappointed. I was, how could you forsake me like that? This isn't how it's supposed to work. And it took me a while to get beyond that because I felt abandoned. I felt like, and I remember there was a dear friend of mine, person in the practice. We would say that someone who makes themselves available for healing, or that we would call for help in that way, is a practitioner. And I wrote to him because he was not in Guam, and I wrote about this to him, and I didn't hear back for a long time. And eventually I came to reconcile that in my thought, but I remember that at the time it was really it shook me up. I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted a different outcome. I wanted to will that outcome. I don't think we can will the outcomes. And I can't even say, that there was a moment where I transitioned back, but it was probably a good year that I was like, this doesn't work, and I think we all go through times like that.
When people see the portrait that we'll make of you, what do you want them to know about you?
I think that sometimes we find our history in the stories about where we've been, and we find our identity in our history, in all the, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and therefore that is who I am. But that is not who I am. I think all of us are at every moment. We are standing with infinite potential to be anything. We're always at that standpoint of being anything. It's I am that I am. I am, and all that went before does not predicate what will become. So I don't want to be limited by all that went before. I am now, and I may be anything. next. You know, I would say that don't bind me in who I was. Don't limit me by you know, I I just am. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is intense.